What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Draft Season Never Ends. My name is Chris McGlynn, host of the show. Excited to be back. Got a lot to talk about. Another big week in the NFL, and we are now under a month away from the 2022 NFL Draft. So thanks so much for tuning in, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or watching this on YouTube. Hello to everyone on YouTube. You can actually see me. It's a bit of a weird concept. Still a new thing for me as well. Never really done a YouTube version of the podcast before, but figured to try it out. Seems to be going super well so far. Anyway, I really appreciate you tuning in. I got a lot to talk about, as I said, and we're getting closer and closer to the draft. I cannot believe that we are already, within 4 weeks of the draft at this point. 4 weeks from right now, we'll be getting ready for day 2 of the draft, second and third round. Day 1 will already be in the books. The whole first round will be done. And thankfully, no blockbuster trades this past week. We did get some big news with Bobby Wagner signing with the Los Angeles Rams. That's actually going to impact a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about today. And that is the biggest team need for every team in the NFC. That's right. We're talking about every single team. Free agency pretty much in the books. I think we've still got a couple of big names out there, right? There's still some players out in the open market that you're surprised by or that could easily fill in some pretty crucial roles on teams as they get ready for the 2022 season. But right now, it seems like rosters are mostly set, and I wonder if we're going to see a lot of these guys that are currently out in the market stay on the market until we get through the draft and teams figure out what last holes they need to plug on their rosters and how they can best fill those with veterans. So with that, we're going to dive in. We're going to start with the NFC West. We'll go division by division in the NFC and take a look at the biggest team needs for each of these teams now that free agency, like I said, mostly done. So that means we're going to start with the Arizona Cardinals. And for me, their biggest need has to be edge rusher. They lose Chandler Jones to the Las Vegas Raiders during free agency. They do have Marcus Golden, who did lead the team in sacks last year, but he really can't do it alone. Devin Kennard is there, but I think he's better as a more rotational player. I don't think he's really the guy that you want starting out on the edge. So there's a couple of veteran players out there. Like I could see them making a run at a Jason Pierre-Paul, maybe an Anthony Barr, guys that'll be able to fit on that outside linebacker spot and get after the passer. I don't know if they're going to go that route. If they go, I think it's going to depend a lot on who's on the board when they are picking at number 23 in this first round. I could easily see them taking a player like George Karlaftis if he's there, maybe even Arnold Ebiketie if he gets picking up enough steam here down the stretch. David Ajabo's on the board probably at that point, given the Achilles injury, and you don't know exactly when he's going to return and how he's going to return from that. So there's a lot of different avenues they could go. They have other needs as well. I could see them maybe going offensive line or even corner, but their cornerback group is looking a lot better ever since they signed Jeff Gladney. So I think edge rusher the way to go for the Arizona Cardinals here. All right, let's move to the San Francisco 49ers. For me, their biggest need has to be interior offensive line, specifically guard, because they had Laken Tomlinson and Tom Compton both leaving free agency. That leaves an interesting group that's there right now. They did draft Aaron Banks from Notre Dame in the second round last year, so maybe he's in contention for one of those spots, but I still think they need to bring somebody else in. Now, keep in mind, the 49ers do not have a first-round pick, but of course, as we've seen, you can oftentimes find starting caliber interior linemen, second, third, fourth, fifth round of the NFL draft. I mean, you look at last year, one of the best, probably the best rookie guard in the NFL was, in fact, Trey Smith, who the Chiefs drafted in the 5th round out of Tennessee. So there's definitely some room for the 49ers to be able to build the interior of this offensive line. But I expect that's probably what they'll end up doing. A day 2 pick is most likely what will end up happening there. There are a couple of guards still out on the market, but most of the top ones have already gone. As they said, they lost Tomlinson and Compton. Brandon Sheriff signed Jacksonville. So I think draft is probably how they have to go in order to fill that need, because they need to fill it. They do have Jimmy Garoppolo still on the roster. I wonder maybe if they can acquire a couple of extra mid-round picks. Maybe they move into the end of the first round. I don't know. It depends, obviously. Into the end of the first round would be kind of tough, considering where they're drafting in the second round. But the point is that they hopefully will have a little bit of extra draft capital as well, be able to use a few of those picks to beef up the interior of that offensive line. All right, let's move to the Seattle Seahawks. Their biggest need, surprise, surprise, is quarterback. Since trading away Russell Wilson, they have not really made any moves here. They obviously acquired Drew Lock as part of the trade, But obviously, as we've seen, Drew Lock probably is not a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL. Now, maybe a new setting will do him well, right? He's still young. He's only about 25 years old. So there's definitely still potential there for Drew Lock to turn his career around, but I wouldn't be counting on that. Otherwise, they have Geno Smith, who we know is a career backup, a solid backup, but a career backup. So I don't. Here's the problem, though. I don't think that Seattle is going to draft a player at number 9. It's not out of the question, but I just feel like this team is relatively far away right now. And it seems like Seattle would rather kind of put the rest of the pieces together and then find a quarterback on a rookie contract to try and win with. It's what they did with Russell Wilson when they went to back-to-back Super Bowls and won one of them. So I could see them trying to follow that method again. Obviously, it's easier said than done. But when you look at, they need needs at offensive tackle, defensive end, linebacker now. As I mentioned, Bobby Wagner is gone. They lost DJ Reed in free agency, so you could go with a corner as well. There's a lot of different areas of the Seattle Seahawks need help. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they just went with best player available, because in truth, the best player available in this draft when they are selecting at number 9 is not going to be a quarterback. This quarterback class just isn't good enough for that. Now, that doesn't mean they couldn't take a Kenny Pickett, a Malik Willis, a Matt Corral, or somebody else if they happen to fall in love with them. That's certainly on the table. The Seattle Seahawks seem to be the one team every year that nobody can quite peg what they're going to do. They usually go a little bit off the reservation with some of their first-round picks, but we'll see. I also wouldn't be shocked. I do think Baker Mayfield is an option here. If Seattle doesn't really like this quarterback class and the Browns get through the draft without having moved Mayfield, there is a possibility that this could be a good landing spot for Baker Mayfield. I don't know how the cap space would work out at this point, to be completely honest with you, but it's still, he's owed obviously a decent amount of money, but if Cleveland is willing to eat some of that cap space, they do have over almost $21 million to work with here, then Seattle could potentially take this contract and see what they have in a relatively young player still, who a year ago led his team to the playoffs. Now, I'm not saying he's going to save the franchise or anything like that, but if you're giving up a third-round pick to get a player who went formerly number 1 overall and still has a little bit left in the tank still, maybe there's enough question marks around him with the injury and all of that, I don't think that's a terrible approach, especially when you look at who Seattle currently has in their quarterback room. We're going to move to the Los Angeles Rams now, the defending champs. That's right. They will not be picking until the 3rd round in this draft, and that's a compensatory pick. They don't have any of their own picks through the first 3 rounds, and that's because they've made moves to go out and sign. Obviously, they traded for Matthew Stafford, which obviously worked out very well for them, and then they also went out and traded for Von Miller last year, which cost them their 2nd and 3rd round picks. But like I said, they do have a compensatory pick in the 3rd, I think the 4th as well. So they have a couple of mid-round picks where they could be looking to the Rams have done a really good job of filling out the end of their roster with these draft picks, these middle to late round draft picks. And that's been a huge part of their success. When you find players like Van Jefferson and Taylor Rapp in the NFL draft, guys that are capable of contributing on your team, then yeah, that makes a big difference for everything that you've got out there. And it makes your team a lot better if you can hit on those later round picks, and then you're spending premium draft picks like your first rounders to go out and get proven players like Matthew Stafford and Jalen Ramsey and players like that, even Von Miller. It wasn't a first round pick, but these guys, it's working for the Rams right now, so they have to continue to hit on these late round draft picks though in order to stay afloat. And now, prior to yesterday, I would have said their biggest need was that inside linebacker. They didn't have Troy Reader. He hadn't re-signed. But then, of course, they go out and they sign Bobby Wagner. So they no longer need an inside linebacker. They got that taken care of. He will play alongside Ernest Jones, and that'll be a really good linebacker pairing for the Rams. Now, I'm going to say right guard is probably the biggest need here. So Andrew Whitworth did retire, but they bring back Joe Noteboom to most likely take over the left tackle spot. But Austin Corbett, he left to go play in Carolina, so that does open up the right guard spot. They don't really have anybody proven there right now. Bobby Evans played a little bit in this past season, didn't look great when he was there, so I think interior lineman probably is the way to go here. I think maybe the Rams will go with a veteran that they bring in, but they're running really, really low on cap space at this point. Obviously, they found ways to manipulate the cap before. They could do it again, but it wouldn't be surprising to me to see them target an interior line with one of their first picks in the NFL draft. I think that's got to be what they're doing. Make sure Matt Stafford is not a very mobile quarterback, so you got to make sure he's got protection and time back there to be able to throw the ball to all those weapons they have within that offense. All right, the Atlanta Falcons moving to the NFC South now. Their biggest need, you could argue quarterback here, but I'm actually going to say wide receiver. And it's not because I really believe that Marcus Mariota is the future at the position or they've got it all figured out there. Obviously, they do not. There's no question about that. But they have him there to bridge the gap. And I think the team just needs to build some sort of infrastructure there. I mean, if you throw next year, a young quarterback, whether it be Bryce Young or CJ Stroud or, take your pick of next year's quarterbacks, onto this roster, they're still really bad. I mean, there's not much to work with. It's an okay offensive line, probably the worst receiver room in the NFL. Yes, you have Kyle Pitts, who's, kind of that wide receiver tight ends, hybrid type player, but you need somebody else to throw to. I mean, Olamide Zaccheaus is probably the top wide receiver right now in Atlanta. And obviously, that's not going to cut it in the NFL. So I'd say wide receiver has to be the focus here, whether they do that in the first round, the second round. This is a deep receiver draft. Maybe even draft 2 receivers in this draft. Wouldn't be a terrible approach. I could see them going with one at number 8. That's very, very much in play. Drake London, Garrett Wilson. I've heard Chris Olave is picking up some steam as well. Take your pick. There's some good receivers at the top of this draft. Shouldn't even rule out. I mean, Jameson Williams, where would he have gone prior to the ACL injury? It probably would have been the first receiver off the board. Now, he does have that ACL injury, which is a bit of a red flag and something that teams will have to be concerned with. But if the Falcons feel good about that, I mean, you get a player of Williams' caliber, that's not a bad thing either. So, and, once we get to the second round, you can see players like Christian Watson, a local player like George Pickens maybe go there. There's a lot of different ways that the Falcons could address this position. But yeah, I think they have to, with one of their first 2 picks, draft a wide receiver. They need one desperately. And no matter who you bring in at quarterback in the future, they're going to need players to throw to down the field. All right, All right, next up, we have the Carolina Panthers, and for me, their biggest need is quarterback. This team has a lot of the pieces in place already, right? They have a pretty solid offensive line. They do need a left tackle. There's no question about that. But they signed Bradley Bozeman. They signed Austin Corbett, as I previously mentioned. We're talking about the Rams. So their offensive line is in decent shape. They got a couple of good receivers with Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore. They drafted Terrace Marshall last year. They don't have a quarterback, though. Right, Sam Darnold is currently there. Cam Newton is a free agent right now, but obviously played with the team last year. Neither of those guys were very good, and that's a big part of the reason why the Panthers are going to be drafting in the top 10 of this draft. Number 6, they were horrendous for most of the year. So, and I don't think you can continue to count on Sam Darnold. Not when Matt Rule's job is on the line. You need to find somebody. Now, the problem is that I don't know there's anybody who's really going to be able to come in and help you win right away. Maybe Kenny Pickett. He feels like the most pro-ready quarterback to me in this draft class. But number 6, it's a little bit early to get him. So he won't be there in the second round, I feel, the way that it sounds like things are going, the buzz that we're hearing heading into the draft at this point. So, maybe you wait around and you go in the second round. This is where I think we could see Baker Mayfield or Jimmy Garoppolo end up. I think the Panthers are a team that they could use a veteran quarterback. Now, the problem is, obviously, they already have Sam Darnold there, who's making roughly the same amount as Baker Mayfield because of the 5th-year option that he has on his rookie contract. They were both drafted in 2018, so it's a very similar number there. So to be spending it's going to end up being close to $40 million in cap space at the quarterback position when you don't have really neither of them are great. It definitely is not a great roster building strategy. So it remains to be seen exactly how they can make that work, especially, Garoppolo's got a relatively high cap hit as well. So it would definitely take some finagling, probably some, the team trading him, either the Browns or the 49ers, he would probably have to eat some of the cap in order to make this work. But I think the Panthers, this is something they would have to consider at this point. there's really not a better way to go about it, and I feel like this roster is pretty close. This defense is good as well. I didn't even touch on that yet. They have a really good secondary. They signed Dante Jackson. They have J.C. Horn, who they drafted in the top 10 last year. They might bring back Stephon Gilmore still. That's relatively unknown at this point. Good linebacking core led by Shaq Thompson. Decent defensive line. Brian Burns and Derek Brown. I mean, there's a lot of talent on the Panthers, the defensive side of the ball. So you need to figure out the offense. Hopefully Christian McCaffrey is healthy. That will help a lot. But you need to figure out the quarterback. That's the biggest thing at this point. Whether it's trading the number 6 pick somehow. The thing is, I don't know who else is left available, right? Like Jimmy Garoppolo and Baker Mayfield are not going to fetch the number 6 pick overall in this draft. So if they trade a third round pick and a 5th round pick to acquire one of them, and then they draft an offensive tackle at number 6, and that would be a great draft for the Panthers. A really, really good way to finish building out this roster and put them in a position to challenge with, I'd say, probably the Buccaneers, top of the division. The Bucs are still the favorite at that point, but they'll be in better shape and definitely looking to, I think they'd be in contention to be a playoff team at that point. All right, speaking of other teams in the NFC South, one team we haven't talked about yet, New Orleans Saints. Now, their biggest need, I'm going to put them right up there with the Atlanta Falcons. They need a wide receiver. You could argue quarterback here. I totally respect that. But I think the team has shown that they feel at least like they have enough confidence in Jameis Winston to bring him back. They were in on Deshaun Watson. That didn't work out, but they bring back Winston. They also signed Andy Dalton to be his backup. Taysom Hill is now officially a tight end. I don't know. That situation is still very confusing to me. But this team hasn't really had any true pass catchers to work with in the past couple of years. Now, big part of that has been that Michael Thomas has been hurt, so hopefully he's back. But then you've got Marquez Callaway, Traquan Smith, who are solid players. LaJordan Humphrey is there. I mean, it's just a group of players that are okay. They're good depth pieces, right? It's a deep receiver room, but they need somebody else to be there to step up, especially if Thomas struggles with injury again, because as soon as he goes out, this Saints offense kind of falls apart and becomes, they're less predictable in that way, but they're easier to defend because you don't have a go-to number 1 receiver anymore. You don't have anybody. So I think we could see New Orleans grab a receiver by day 2 at the latest. Offensive tackle could certainly be in place as well, as they lost Teron Armstead. I think James Hurst will probably take over that left tackle spot, at least for the time being. Maybe they'll draft somebody a little bit later at the draft and see if they could develop him as well to compete down the line. But I think wide receiver, if you're the Saints, I mean, this is such a good draft class. At 18, there's going to be somebody there on the board, whether it's Jameson Williams or Chris Olave. If you feel good about Treylon Burks from Arkansas, there's a lot of players that could be an option there for them. And like I said, second round, definitely an option as well. But I wouldn't wait on this. You need to give Jameis Winston some weapons to work with if you want him to be successful. And I just don't think they can afford to wait much longer to see if they can make this work. All right, speaking of Winston's former team, that would be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And it's been a really weird offseason for the Buccaneers. I didn't even touch on it in the open. Bruce Arians officially moving to the front office, which means that Todd Bowles is taking over at head coach. So it does keep a lot of continuity there. Bowles was the defensive coordinator previously with the Buccaneers. So it's not a huge coaching staff change, but obviously it's going to look a little bit different. And one of the biggest things I think the Bucs still need to address here is Tom Brady's protection, right? Ali Marpet retired. Alex Kappa is now in Cincinnati. Now, they did trade already for Shaq Mason, who was a Patriot, one of Brady's former teammates when he was there in New England. But they don't have a left guard right now. Mason, I think, will slot in on the right side, and they still need a left guard. So, end of the first round here, where the Bucs will be drafting, that feels like a really good spot, maybe for Bernard Raymond, Darian Kennard, if you want to kick him inside potentially to play guard. I think he's long enough that he could play tackle, but if you kick him inside for a year, I don't know. There's going to be a couple players that could be in play for them there, and I think that's probably where they're going to invest that first-round pick in Brady's protection. And then you go maybe address some of the defensive needs along the way. You need some defensive linemen and stuff like that as you get deeper and deeper into this draft. But the Bucs have had a really good track record of being able to find guys kind of on day 2, develop them, turning into solid players along that front 7. So I think they'll be able to do that again here, most likely. It's not a guarantee, but I think that's probably the order of priorities for them. Go left guard and then address the defensive line from there. Let's move to the NFC North now. Let's start with the Chicago Bears. the Bears have been trying, and I got to give them credit here, to find a way to get Justin Fields some better protection after he was running for his life for most of his rookie season. He got sacked quite a bit. Now, some of that is on Fields. He holds the ball too long, was one of the biggest kind of issues with him when he was coming out of college. But of course, he needs some more time in the pocket to be able to make plays. And so they James Daniel, he left already. He went to the Steelers. They tried to bring in Ryan Bates, but then Bates ended up staying with Buffalo. So right now, their starting right guard is Dakota Dozier, who is a career backup. I can tell you, as a Jets fan, not a player you want starting on your offensive line. So they need to find somebody in the draft. Now, they don't have a first-round pick, but like I said earlier when talking about the Rams, there's going to be a lot of players deeper into the draft where you could find players that are capable of starting on your offensive line, especially on the interior in the middle rounds of the draft. You don't always need to spend a first-round pick to get a guard or center capable of starting in the NFL. Creed Humphrey went in the second round last year, and he might be one of the top 5 centers in the NFL already, which is pretty remarkable. So I think the Bears will definitely be targeting interior offensive line as they get up in the draft in the second round, in the third round. They obviously could still use a receiver, maybe. Allen Robinson left, a couple other areas that they could address, but I'd say right guard is the place to start. Make sure that Justin Fields has some time to throw this year. One of the biggest things that hampers a young quarterback's ability to develop is constantly being under pressure. So I think the Bears have to prioritize making sure that he can stay upright this year and actually allow him to work on progressing through his reads when he has enough time to do so. Let's move to the Detroit Lions. They need a wide receiver here still. I know they got Amon-Ra St. Brown. They have a deep receiver room, actually. They have DJ Chark, Josh Reynolds, Khalif Raymond, Quintus Cephas as well. It's a pretty good group. But the problem is, though, is that they don't really have a true number one option. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is great number 2. Chark maybe could be there, but he just can't seem to stay healthy right now. We haven't seen it consistently from him to say that he really can do that. So I don't think they're going to draft a receiver, obviously, at number 2 overall. That'll probably be a defensive player there. They could use an edge rusher as well. But I think receiver, getting a number 1 receiver, whether that's with the 32nd pick or the 34th pick, right? They have the last pick of the first round, courtesy of the Matt Stafford trade, and number 34 will be their own second round pick. I could see them going receiver with either of those ones. There's going to be a couple of guys on the board right there that I think are capable of becoming number 1 receivers, right? Maybe it's a Jahan Dotson, George Pickens I already mentioned, Christian Watson. There's going to be some good players on the board there. Heck, maybe even Treylon Burks is there, who big body player. We've seen the Lions have success with those types of players before. So I think, wide receiver has to be the biggest focus here. I know that people will say, oh, what about edge rusher? I think, yes, they definitely need an edge rusher, but they have a couple of players there that are capable of at least filling in the spots. I just think that for this offense to really try and take that next step, they got to have somebody who's going to be the go-to receiver within that offensive framework, and they don't have that right now. And it sets up well for the Lions wanting to find their quarterback of the future, it seems like, in 2023, after giving Jared Goff one more year to see if he can make this work in Detroit. Green Bay Packers, shockingly facing a similar plight to the Detroit Lions here in that they do not have any receivers right now. Well, they really don't have any receivers right now. Devontae Adams is now in with the Raiders in Las Vegas, and then you've got Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who headed to Kansas City as a free agent. So they need to find some weapons here. They have Randall Cobb still. That's not going to quite get it done anymore. Maybe 5 years ago, that would have made you feel pretty good, but not anymore. Now, I do think they'll go after a veteran. Julio Jones, T.Y. Hilton, A.J. Green, a couple of the guys that come off the top of my head here. Those guys definitely are in play, and I think that they will probably sign a veteran, but they still probably need to draft a receiver, maybe even 2 in this draft. They've got 2 first-round picks at 22 and at 29. One of those, to me, feels like it has to be a receiver, and I don't think you can come out of this draft without drafting a receiver in the first 2 rounds. Heck, they might even take 2 receivers in the first 2 rounds. That wouldn't be a terrible idea here. They notoriously have not invested in the position. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's been like a decade since the Packers last drafted a receiver in the first round of the draft, but they need to find weapons for Aaron Rodgers to work with. I know that Matt LaFleur loves to run the ball, and I understand that, but you got to find some guys to be able to play with here, because if you continue to do this, you're going to end up wasting the end of Rodgers' prime, right? You already consider retiring once. It's going to be a really easy decision for him to retire if he's no weapons to play with next year. So I think the Packers definitely need to address that position quickly. You can't wait on that too long in the NFL draft. All right, Minnesota Vikings here, wrapping up the NFC North. And for me, this is still corner. I know it's a joke at this point, right? Vikings fans are so tired of hearing it. But unfortunately, you guys still don't really have a number one corner. Patrick Peterson did re-sign with the team, but he's there on a one-year deal. And as we've seen, he's getting older, right? He's no longer able to play at the same level we're used to seeing from him. He's not 25 anymore and shutting down other teams' best players. There are a couple of big-name free agents out there. I could see them going after a Stephon Gilmore, maybe Richard Sherman. Joe Hayden's also available. But I also think they need to draft somebody here. If Derek Stingley Jr. is there at number 12, my goodness, I think they have to just pull the trigger. I know there's some concerns with him, the injury red flags and stuff like that, and I know that Vikings fans probably hate that, given how the track record has been with them, whether it was Mike Hughes, when he tore his ACL as a rookie, Jeff Gladney obviously facing legal troubles that ended up forcing the team to release him, Trey Waynes didn't pan out. I mean, they've gone through the gamut drafting first-round corners over the past 7-8 years. Unfortunately, it just hasn't worked out. So maybe this year will be different. I don't know. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. They do have a different GM there, so this is going to be a new regime. It'll be interesting to see what they prioritize, but corner to me still feels like their biggest need. They need to be able to find somebody, especially after I initially was thinking edge rusher until they brought in Zadarius Smith. So that's great. They got an edge rusher for themselves, a really solid pass rusher to work off the edge. They need to find somebody now in the back end who's capable of covering, especially when you play in a division with Aaron Rodgers. I know he doesn't have any of his receivers anymore, but he's got to get a couple, you would think, in the draft, and he's still Aaron Rodgers. He's found a way to make it work with less before. Let's move to the NFC East, and we'll start with the Dallas Cowboys. There's a couple different directions the Cowboys go. They've been quiet in free agency, which is a bit of unexpected. They traded away Amari Cooper. They did bring back Michael Gallup. And they still have CeeDee Lamb, so they have a couple wide receivers there. I could see them maybe going wide receiver in the draft, but I'd say that's probably some of their push on the line. They did sign James Washington, who I think is a good depth player there, from Texas originally, or from, I don't know if he's from Oklahoma or Texas, but from that area of the country. So kind of homecoming for him. Definitely makes a lot of sense for them to go out and grab him too after losing Cedric Wilson to the Dolphins. But I think they're going to end up going with safety here, in potentially being their biggest need. And the reason for that is DeMonte Kazee is still a free agent. He has not re-signed. Donovan Wilson, probably best suited to be a backup. They did re-sign Jayron Kearse, which is great. That's somebody they need to have on the back end of their defense. He played well last year, but they still have that other safety spot kind of open right now. So late in the first round, I could see them maybe going safety here, depending on who's on the board. Daxton Hill could certainly be in play, safety from Michigan. But it wouldn't be surprised to see them wait until the second round here. The Cowboys have had a decent amount of success drafting defensive backs in the second round. I mean, they drafted, obviously, the biggest example would be Trayvon Diggs, which is great for them. They also drafted Kelvin Joseph last year, waiting to see if he develops. They have had success. Jordan Lewis, who was a mid-round pick a couple years back. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them wait there, maybe go edge rusher in the first round for losing Randy Gregory. So it'll be interesting to see how they end up approaching this, but I think they got to find right now a safety is probably the biggest thing on their to-do list heading into the draft. New York Giants, they still need offensive line help, unfortunately. They've been trying really hard to make this work, but it just hasn't quite worked out yet. Andrew Thomas did take some steps in the right direction this past year after a rocky rookie season, but they still need to find another tackle here, and so I'm going to say offensive tackle is their biggest need. They have 2 picks in the top 10. They're going to spend one of those at an offensive tackle, whether it ends up being Evan Neal, Ikem Ekwonu, Charles Crosses. I know be meeting with the team as well. I think that's a little early for him, but certainly somebody that could be in play as well. They're committed to at least giving Daniel Jones one more year, right? They're going to see what they have in him. They haven't extended his 5th-year option yet. They have until May to make that decision, so it'd be interesting to keep an eye on that. But they seem committed, at least for this season, to say, Daniel Jones, this is your team. We're going to invest in the players and personnel necessary for you to actually be successful. And that has to start in the offensive line. Getting one of those guys would be great. And then you've got two tackles who are capable of kind of bookending that offensive line. The interior of the line is still a little bit of a work in progress. I think that's something that they still have to address, but that could be done later in the draft. And there's still a couple of veteran players out there that they can look to bring in to really bolster that group. But yeah, Jones needs better protection. Saquon Barkley needs better run blocking all the way around. They just need to improve this unit. They've been trying. I know it was one of Dave Gettleman's biggest things was building in the trenches, but it turned out he was not very good at it, unfortunately. So we'll have to see if Joe Shane and this new regime are much better at it, because they need to be. Philadelphia Eagles, one of the surprise teams to me, at least last year, and they're going to be very busy on draft day. They've got 3 first-round picks, and I think the biggest need they're going to have to address here with one of those 3 first-rounders is linebacker. And I know the Eagles historically do not value the position. But when you've got 3 first-round picks and you've got first-round talent out there like Devin Lloyd, Nakobe Dean, I'd even throw Quay Walker in there, who I'm really high on. It's probably a little bit early for him, but it's still a player that I think I could see the Eagles really liking and potentially using to effectively. They need to find somebody to play linebacker. Their linebacker unit is one of the worst in the league, and it needs an upgrade desperately. And I think when you've got those 3 first rounders, that still allows you to go out there. You can target, a corner. You can target a wide receiver. You can target an edge rusher, a defensive tackle. You can do all of those things still. You can come out and address a number of your needs and still be able to take a linebacker here. And I think that's the flexibility the Eagles have in the first round here. Now, knowing the Eagles, they'll probably wait until the 3rd round to address their linebacker position again, but who knows? I think if Devin Lloyd is on the board there at 15 or 16, just pull the trigger and feel really good about the fact that you got a versatile linebacker capable of covering, rushing the passer, and just being somebody who all around improves your defense. Something they desperately need, and they've been pushing off for a really, really long time. All right, we'll wrap it up here with the Washington Commanders. To me, their biggest need is wide receiver. You could argue maybe safety here as well. If Kyle Hamilton slips, that's going to be a really interesting situation. But you've got Carson Wentz. You gave him a couple draft picks to be able to go get him. So for right now, that's the quarterback. And you need to find somebody other than Terry McLaurin for him to throw to. Terry McLaurin is great. No question about it. He has suffered, unfortunately, from having some really poor quarterback play the last few years. But when he has talent around him, you see him just take another step. And that's true of a lot of players, obviously. McLaurin, I think, is truly capable of being a number 1 receiver. But going out there, finding somebody else, maybe getting another former Ohio State player. You get Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. Like I said, Jamison Williams is definitely in play here as well. Drake London. There's a lot of players that could be on the board here for the Commanders. And it's a deep receiver class, so you could wait on a little bit. But they don't have a lot of those mid-round picks now because they traded a few of them away to go get Carson Wentz. So I say you just take that first-round pick, use it on your top receiver available, and feel really good about your offense now heading into the 2022 season, or at least a lot better about it than you did a year ago. They obviously could go offensive line as well. There were some question marks still along there with that unit, but I think wide receiver the way to go here for Washington. All right, so that's going to wrap it up here for our NFC team needs. I'll do the AFC next week, and I'm actually writing an article on this right now as well. It's going to be up on aftermathsports.com, so you guys are kind of getting a sneak preview into that. And yeah, I mean, I'm super excited. I really kind of can't believe that we're, like I said earlier, we're now under a month away, and it's just great. Like I'm super pumped right now, and got so much more work to do still on this draft class. I'm already guilty, I will admit, of even looking ahead a little bit, starting to think about some of the top players in next year's draft already. But got to wait on that. Got to give that a little bit longer before I really dive into all of that here. But so if you're still listening, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And you guys will hear from me again next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to Draft Season Never Ends. Remember, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Remember to rate, review, subscribe, all that great stuff. You could also follow the Aftermath on social media, Facebook and Twitter. Might add a couple other social media handles at some point, but right now that's what we got. At Aftermath Sports on Twitter, and Aftermath Sports is the name of the Facebook page as well. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. You guys will hear from me again next week.